Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 8th chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes belongs in the genre of Old Testament wisdom literature, and it's distinct from the book of Proverbs, where in the book of Proverbs Solomon expounds on the usefulness of wisdom. By Ecclesiastes, which are his more mature musings, we find him questioning the usefulness and meaningfulness of wisdom. And in the 18th verse of the first chapter, he says that the increase of wisdom is diametrically proportioned to the increase in grief. So in other words, the more we know, the more aware of imperfections we become in the world, and the more aware we are of the distance which exists between our wisdom, what we can know, and what we do know, versus the omniscient one, Elohim, who knows all, infinite intelligence. But in the second chapter, we find him weighing the respective merits of wisdom and folly. His quest takes him on the path which categorically considers whether the foolish are better off than the wise, and he does affirm the superiority of wisdom. And in the opening verse in this chapter, we also read an expression that suggests that life is better with wisdom, and it reads, "Who is like a wise one, and who knows the meaning of a matter? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed." So wisdom can be the source of confidence for the wise one, and life is better, even though it cannot prevent death. It can ultimately add more meaning, a life lived with wisdom, whereas a life lived apart from wisdom cannot satisfy the answers which are intrinsic to every human. And these questions are by no means unique to kings, as Solomon spans the range of the socioeconomic order in his quest in the previous chapters. "I guard the king's command because of the oath before Elohim." Now, as a king, the king of Israel would have been distinct from the majority of Near Eastern monarchs in that they were bound by a law. They were subjected to the same law, the laws of Moses. In Deuteronomy 17, we read that the kings, when they do emerge, are instructed to contemplate the ramifications of the law as a daily endeavor. And Solomon, for the most part, was a godly king and ruled righteously and administered justice and equity, although towards the tail end of his life we find him departing from that, in that he conscripted forced service of Israelites for the vast workings of his buildings projects in explicit violation of the Mosaic law. But the principle is clear that even monarchs will one day die and have to answer for the life they lived, and the weight of the responsibility they carry almost invites greater consequences. "Do not be in a hurry to go from his presence. Do not take a stand in an evil matter, for he does whatever he pleases. Where the word of a king is, there is power, and who says to him, 'What are you doing?'" So the nature and the structure of absolute monarchies does not permit a king to be criticized or questioned as we are accustomed to in our democracy and our democratic form of government. We're not strictly speaking democracy, although democratic principles are ingrained in our republican framework. But the principle is that Solomon was very much a creature of his time, and he was no less than the absolute monarch of his sovereignty. And so he reflects the accepted axiom that a ruler is to rule absolutely and not be questioned or criticized. "He who guards the commands knows no evil matter, and the heart of the wise discerns both time and justice." So the beneficial consequence of contemplating and keeping the commands is that you will be prevented from evil. Rules or commandments are necessary evils which prevent us from succumbing to unnecessary evils, namely following our own carnal lust and self-conceited interest, which is a recipe for ruin. And the benefits of wisdom is you are able to discern the time. That means you have an awareness of the cosmic consequences of the decisions we make in time, and they're able to minister justice fairly and equitably. And so wisdom is especially essential in those who rule and exercise authority over men. Because for every matter there is a time in justice, though the trouble of man is heavy upon him. So even the injustices which escape earthly punishment and consequences will one day have to be answered for, and there will be no escaping the judgment, which will be final, total, swift, and sudden for those who thought they got away with administering injustices and exploiting the vulnerable in this lifetime. For he does not know what shall be, so who declares to him when it shall be? So this is an awareness of the finite nature of man. They do not have an inkling of an idea of the consummation of history or the encroaching end times. And so who are any of us to say when this will be, and that we know that it will be, but none of us can say when it will be. No one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There is no discharge in battle, and wickedness does not release those who are given to it. So spirit we recognize by the inference to be a higher power. This is all physical creatures are subjected to spiritual authorities, and no one has the power to prevent their death or the inevitable judgment which accompanies one's death. And we are engaged in spiritual warfare, and once being engaged, there is no discharge. We cannot be removed from the battle. Once we're in it to win it, and it is life or death struggle, and the consequences are eternal. And wickedness always, the devil always betrays his own. So those who submit to Satan can enjoy a few fleeting victories here and there, but they're ultimately siding with the inferior spirit who always betrays his own. So wickedness will not absolve the wicked of their wickedness, because that is just its nature. All this I have seen. I applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which a man rules over a man for his evil. So Solomon was a polymath of sorts. In addition to his kingly duties of administering justice and overseeing commerce and diplomacy, he was also an intellectual polymath. He had an extensive knowledge of biology and what would come to be known as the intellectual discipline of philosophy, although it did not emerge as a distinct body of academic knowledge until the Greeks around the 6 centuries before the Messiah. And so I saw the wicked buried, and they came and went from the place of sanctification, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. That too is vanity. So he's noting that the tendency is that for those who make a show and a spectacle of absorbing the ritualistic rites of religion, i.e. going to the temple, being seen to pray publicly, to do alms publicly, they are masking an inner wickedness which they mask through outer works of righteousness. And whereas those who are truly righteous and poor and humble do not have the publicity to which to mask their, to put on the charade that the rich do. And this was, he was aware of it as a king. And even though they will be highly praised at the funeral, they do not have, with eloquent eulogies, they will not have a lot to look forward to in the judgment, which they cannot escape. And their mask and pretense will be stripped irrevocably from Elohim, who judges the hearts. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is filled in them to do evil. So in other words, because our wicked actions do not immediately provoke a retaliatory response and the balancing of justice, that inspires and instills men who who are seemingly absolved of the consequences of their wickedness to pursue wickedness to its extreme end. And in so doing, they are piling on the retribution which is to come in the life and judgment which awaits them. Although a sinner is doing evil 100 times and is prolonged, yet I know that there is good to those who fear Elohim, who reverence before him. So sinners, by being creatures of habit in nature, are sinners by nature, and they sin as a matter of course. And the evil which awaits them, they can at best prolong it, but they have no expectation to escape the dreaded judgment. And those who are good and fear Elohim aren't awaited with the similar concerns, at least not eternally. Now, living righteously often invites the reproach of the world, and that is something altogether different we have to contend with. But it shall not be well with the wicked, nor would he prolong his days as a shadow, because he does not fear before Elohim. So the wicked are estranged from Elohim, whom they do not fear, and live, even if they intellectually acknowledge his existence. The actions they pursue are as if he didn't exist, and the implicit inference of his existence is that he will judge every man according to their works for the life that they lived at the end of this life. And so the sinners are in for a rude awakening when they realize that they have no advocate, no recourse, and no escaping the inevitability of judgment for their actions. There is a vanity which has been done on earth, that there are righteous ones who get according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked ones who get according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this too is futile. So he's noting a discrepancy between the consequences of the righteous, which are bestowed on the wicked, and the consequences befitting the unrighteous, which are bestowed on the righteous. So the innocent suffer and the oppressor are rewarded. And this, even though he himself administered justice and fairness and equity in his station as absolute monarch, there were inevitably lower-level court cases which escaped his judgment, and there is little he could do about it, but he was aware of it, and he did respond righteously to this deficiency in his system of governance. Therefore I praised enjoyment, because there is no good to man except to eat and to drink and to rejoice, and it remains with him in his labor for the days of his life, which Elohim has given him under the sun. So for the fourth time in the same book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon expresses the fact that there is nothing unrighteous in enjoying taking pleasure or enjoying the fruits of our labor. This is befitting the gift of life, which is Elohim's gift to us. Ergo, how we live that life ought to be our gift to him. And the problem in enjoying the fruits of one's labor is that they may take or the danger rather, is that they may be more grateful for the gifts than they are to the giver, and neglect to pay homage to the giver who bestows upon them the gift, and therein lies the danger. But on the whole and on the balance, there is nothing unrighteous about the righteous man enjoying what they are entitled to enjoy, so long as they keep Elohim at the forefront of their mind and not lose sight of the giver in the midst of the gifts. When I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to see the task which has been done on the earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night. So he had assigned himself to probe the mystery of life, to find out its meaning and purpose, and Ecclesiastes is very much the recorded struggle in this endeavor, and he does ultimately reach a conclusion. Now, in the passages thus far, his most conclusive answers are non-conclusive. He notes the vanity of certain items, wisdom, riches, which men esteem and treasure, and yet they are powerless to prevent death. But he does reach an ultimate conclusion on the 13th verse of the 12th chapter. That's getting a little far ahead of ourselves. But this was an extraordinary task for a king to assign himself. Now, most kings were not concerned with metaphysical or theoretical or abstract philosophies, as was Solomon, but he was an exceptional king, and he applied his mind diligently and used the wisdom which Elohim had gifted him to a productive end. Then I saw all the works of Elohim, that man is unable to find out the work that has been done under the sun. For though a man labors to seek, yet he does not find, and even though a wise one claims to know, he is unable to find it. So there is an inescapable mystery, which is the object of his pursuit, which is the meaning of life, which is known to and hidden by Elohim, which man can struggle and endeavor to find out, but anyone who claims to has figured it out is in effect lying. And true wisdom consists in an acknowledgement of the finiteness of one's knowledge and intelligence, and Solomon did not suffer from any intellectual conceit. He truly was the wisest man who ever lived, the Savior accepted, and we find this wisdom reflective and replete throughout the books which he penned. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.